Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into an absolute marvel of biological engineering, the very thing that powers, well, literally every single move you make. We're talking about muscle tissue. In this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers of the human body and get up close and personal with the microscopic machinery that keeps us moving, digesting, and, living. We'll look right at the cellular level to see exactly how form meets function in the body's ultimate engine of movement.
But hey, before we get to the microscopic stuff, let me ask you something. Think about what your body is doing right this second. Your eyes are darting across the screen reading these words, right? That's a voluntary action. You are consciously choosing to do it. But at the exact same time, your heart is beating away in your chest, totally on autopilot. So how on earth do the microscopic cells controlling those deliberate eye movements differ from the ones automatically pumping blood through your veins? Well, it all comes down to their histology, their microscopic tissue structure.
To really grasp these differences, we first need to define what muscle tissue actually is. It's one of the four primary types of animal tissue, right alongside epithelial, connective, and nervous tissue. And what makes muscles so incredibly unique is its strict specialization for one very specific task: contraction. Histologically speaking, under a microscope, these cells look a whole lot like threads. Because of that thread-like appearance, they're commonly called muscle fibers. And since they're so specialized, they even get their own custom vocabulary. The cytoplasm inside a muscle fiber, we call that the sarcoplasm, and its outer plasma membrane is the sarcolemma. Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of it all, we've got a clear roadmap today. We're going to hit four main areas. First, skeletal muscle. Second, cardiac muscle. Third, smooth muscle. And finally, we'll wrap up by comparing all three side by side.
All right, section 1, skeletal muscle. This is all about voluntary power.
Let's start with the big one. When you hear the word muscle in everyday conversation, this is almost certainly what you're picturing. As the name heavily implies, skeletal muscle is found attached directly to your bones, mostly anchored by tough bands of connective tissue we know as tendons. Whether you're, say, running a marathon, lifting a cup of coffee, or just typing an email, skeletal muscle is the tissue making that voluntary movement happen. It is literally the mechanism that lets us physically interact with the world around us. Now, what's really fascinating here is the architecture that makes all that powerful movement possible. If we zoom in, skeletal muscle is made of long, unbranched, cylindrical fibers that run perfectly parallel to each other. It's kind of like a bundle of cables. And because these fibers are so incredibly long, a single nucleus just doesn't cut it. They're actually multinucleated, meaning they have dozens of nuclei, all pushed right out to the peripheral edges of the cell, just under that sarcolemma. But the most obvious visual feature? The stripes. Skeletal muscle has these highly distinct alternating dark A bands and light I bands. These striations happen because the contractile proteins inside, actin and myosin, are stacked so tightly together to generate the absolute maximum pulling force.
And here's the best part. This brilliant biological setup is entirely at your command. Skeletal muscle is all about voluntary action. It operates under the strict, conscious control of your somatic nervous system. So whenever you decide to take a step, an electrical impulse from your brain zips down your spinal cord and tells these specific, parallel, striated fibers to contract. Just like that. Moving right along to section 2, cardiac muscle, the heartbeat. So, now that we know how our skeleton moves, let's look at a muscle type that shares a few similarities, but evolved for a totally different, non-stop job. Cardiac muscle is the ultimate VIP of the body. It's incredibly exclusive. You will find it in exactly one place in your entire body, the muscular wall of the heart, also known as the myocardium. This tissue never rests. It never takes a day off. It's responsible for pumping blood through your system from before you're even born until your very last day. Histologically, cardiac muscle is a total masterpiece of adaptation. Unlike those long, parallel cables in skeletal muscle, cardiac cells are short, they're thick, and they are highly branched. They connect end to end to form this continuous, 3D, pulsing network. Usually, they just have one central nucleus. Now, they do have striations, much like skeletal muscle, though they're a bit less prominent. But the absolute defining feature, the giveaway for cardiac tissue, is the presence of these dark staining transverse lines called intercalated discs. These unique structures are amazing. They contain mechanical adhesions called desmosomes, which physically keep the cells from ripping apart during forceful heartbeats, plus gap junctions. The gap junctions allow electrical signals to flash from one cell to the next almost instantly.
This is the secret sauce that ensures your heart contracts as one perfectly synchronized unit.
So, the crucial takeaway here is that you don't have to think to keep yourself alive. Cardiac muscle is 100% involuntary. Thankfully, you don't need to consciously remind your heart to keep beating while you're asleep. Instead, it's beautifully regulated by your autonomic nervous system and the heart's very own internal electrical pacemaker. It just automatically adjusts your heart rate whether you're chilling on the couch or out for a run. Which brings us to section 3, smooth muscle. Think of this as your body's autopilot operations, operating entirely behind the scenes to manage the crucial internal plumbing of our bodies. We have smooth muscle. You'll find this lining the walls of almost all your hollow internal organs. It forms the structure of your blood vessels to regulate blood pressure. It lines your respiratory airways, the urinary bladder, the uterus, and basically your entire digestive tract. When your body pushes food along during digestion, a process called peristalsis, that is smooth muscle doing the heavy lifting, silently and continuously. If we look at this tissue under the microscope, it is drastically different from the first two. Smooth muscle cells are spindle-shaped, which scientists call fusiform. This basically means they're thick in the middle and tapered off at the ends. They pack really closely together in dense sheets, and each cell just has a single, centrally located oval nucleus. But notice what's missing here. There are absolutely no striations. It completely lacks that highly regular, striped sarcomere organization we saw in skeletal and cardiac tissues. And that is exactly why we call it smooth muscle. Instead of stripes, it relies on a crisscrossing network of actin and myosin, which is anchored to the cell membrane by these things called dense bodies. This setup creates a slow, squeezing, sustained contraction. And just like cardiac muscle, smooth muscle operates completely outside of our conscious control. It's a strictly involuntary tissue, driven by the autonomic nervous system, circulating hormones, and even just local physical stretch. For example, when you eat a huge meal and it stretches the walls of your stomach, the smooth muscle there responds automatically, kicking off those slow, sustained contractions to break down your food. Let's move to our final segment, Section 4, comparing the 3 muscles, and see how this all builds together. All right, let's synthesize everything we've learned and look at the whole picture. When we put these 3 side by side, the patterns are so clear. Skeletal muscle, long cylindrical cables, voluntarily controlled, prominently striped, and bolted to our skeleton for movement. Cardiac muscle, uniquely branched with those all-important intercalated discs, totally involuntary, moderately striped, and isolated exclusively in the heart. And finally, smooth muscle, spindle-shaped, completely unstriped, involuntary, and working non-stop to keep our hollow organs functioning. Seeing them together like this really highlights how perfectly the microscopic architecture of a cell dictates its massive macro-level job in our body. Form and function are just wonderfully inseparable here. Which brings us to the end of our exploration today. Next time you take a brisk step, feel your pulse quicken, or even just digest a good meal, take a second to ask yourself, which microscopic machinery is hard at work right now? Is it the striated parallel cables of your skeletal system, the branched rhythmic network of your heart, or the smooth, untiring sheets deep in your organs? Our bodies are just an absolute wonderland of cellular engineering, running millions of tiny, perfectly synchronized engines every single second just to keep us going. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep marveling at the incredible science inside you.